Yes.
So welcome everybody to another panel discussion. And today we are talking about what makes a meaningful life. And I'm really delighted to have with me three amazing people. I'm going to go clockwise. So we've got KB, Kulbhushan Sharma, known as KB, who's a Reiki master and healer with a background in psychology and truth-seeking. So he's been spending all his life looking for answers. Kathy Wong is a social entrepreneur who's going in and out of retirement because she always finds really interesting projects. And at the moment, she is managing a 3-month-old poodle, right?
Yes, toy poodle.
Toy poodle, yes. But she's also got all sorts of other projects going, judging from what I can see on Facebook. And then we have Chris Chittenden, who is a coach with 30 years experience, who spent his life working with leaders, but now works with people in life transition, mostly with people in their 20s. So he's passing on his wisdom to the younger generation. And it was his idea to talk about a meaningful life. So Chris, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts about?
Thanks, Angela. I guess that the thing that showed up to me initially about when I started thinking about working with people in their 20s, it all sort of stemmed from an idea that my daughter had. Many years ago, we were talking about the company that I have used to run coach training programs in ontological coaching. And my son worked with us for a period of time and went through the program to a degree. And then my daughter had been off doing comms and media degree and sort of getting on with other things in her life, did a gap year, etc. And when she was finishing up her degree, she asked me if I would do the coach program with her to help her understand the sort of work that I'd done over time. And I reflected at the time that I wrote that course 20 years ago now, and what would I do differently now? And one of the things that then came out of that was that I thought that I would create a process or a program for people in their 20s, which Jamie is my daughter, with a view of helping them work out how to be an adult in life. So many people that I'd coached over the years had come to be in their 40s and had been very successful by their own definition of success, but felt very unfulfilled in life. And one of the things that seemed quite common through those conversations that I had over time was that for so many people, they had formed a sense of what made a good life back in their teens. They learnt it from other people and never really thought about it, never redefined it. They were living the life they thought they wanted as a teenager almost. And so the process that I worked with then with people was how to create a more meaningful life and create meaning for yourself in your 20s, so that rather than just blindly going on through life as you saw it when you were young, you started to think about how you would do that. The principle for me around a meaningful life is twofold. One is that I think that when people tend to think of meaning in life, they tend to think of the big meaning. Sort of, you go back to Aristotle and his virtue ethics and sort of like the idea of what is a good life, that big question of what is a good life. And obviously many people in the world of philosophy and many other disciplines have thought about that down through the years. I think that's what most people tend to think of when they think about meaning in life. But for me, in my work, and my work is more than just coaching, it also sort of has a philosophical bent as well. I came to think about meaning of life, so the big questions of life, but then there's also meaning in life. Every day we are constantly making meaning about what's going on in our circumstances and creating a sense of what it means for us and how do we actually navigate our way through life because of thoughts of meaning. Just wondering whether we've lost Kathy there.
Yeah, I think we may have.
No, sorry. No, I'm listening.
Oh, But your internet is really
to what you're saying.
There was this wonderful pose going on, wasn't there?
Oh, okay, I can't see it.
okay. You're coming in and out. Okay, but that's okay. That's part of it. Okay, so in life.
So part of the thing for me is that a lot of people talk about being present, but for me, the idea of being present is more about that we're always stepping into the unknown. We're always stepping into the future, and we have to make sense of every situation we find ourselves in. The information that comes in through our senses, the stories that we run within ourselves, our emotional states, physical states, etc. We're constantly making sense of that in order to navigate what's next. And so one of the things that was clear to me in my work anyway, that's the way I thought about it, was that we're constantly making sense of life, creating meaning about life. But we often lose connection between that everyday meaning making and the bigger questions. And so what I sought to do was create an idea that how do you connect the way we make sense of life in the moment to the way that we make sense of life in the big picture. And part of that for me was that my listening to the way that people thought about meaning in life was they were looking for an answer to life. So often you go into the world of religion, for example, where various religions offer an answer to what a good life is. Live this way and you will live a good life. For me, it's actually far more about living in the question and living in questions on a moment by moment basis, which then enriches the story of what something means. So as an example, one of the things that I do is I create this idea of having a foundational story. And
before you continue, I would really like to stay in that meaning as a question. Because I think Cassie just went a little bit like this. And I was wondering, because you live a very flexible life, what does that mean to you?
No, I was just listening to what Chris was saying. I thought, well, that's a really interesting way of putting it, living life in question. I think, you also touched on living life in the present and there's a bit of discussion around that. And so for me, what it looks like to me is really almost like unlearning. It's like, as you said, we spend most people, I think, spend most of their time questioning life, right? And looking for that big answer. I've come to the conclusion that there is no answer, really, that for me, it's all about, as you said, it's about living in those moments, right? And it's about being okay with not having to have a meaning. Do you know what I mean? Like just being able to be in the moment, enjoy a lot those small moments. It doesn't have to be this big significant thing, which is how I saw life in the past. My past was I was constantly looking for that meaning, and I thought it had to be this huge, living my life the best I can for me. And it's about the people who touch my life, have loved me. It's really simple now. It's completely the opposite to what I thought it was. What I thought I was looking for, what I thought it was going to be. There's a lot of cliches around all this sort of stuff too, right? And as you also mentioned, Chris, we're all fed these images of what a meaningful life should be from a very young age, right? But I think for me, another part of what I'm sorry, I'm a bit all over the place in my thought process here, but the other thing is about no of expectation, and expectation creates disappointment. And so I'm trying to really not have expectations. I haven't got it down pat, that's for sure, but I do realize that expectation causes a lot of there's a lot of expectation around this meaning of life. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So for me, sorry, Angela. Sorry.
No, you just froze.
Oh, okay. So for me, yes, giving up expectations, just living in the moment, trying to live my life the way feels right for me without over analyzing it, because I have been, an over analyzer since dot. And so I went to AA, or OA, I should call it. And, I've been trying to let that go too, which is it's all tied in really. It's not, to me, it's not like it's one thing, it's a whole series of things that are linked together. But they still come from that basis of, when we were young, being sold upon these various concepts, of what a meaningful life should be.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm probably repeating myself here.
Okay. I'm just really curious because we're talking about a Western concept at the moment of what meaning of life is, and the what we're being sold is meaningful. And is about success as well, right?
Yeah.
So what about in India, KB? I mean, what does, because there's a different spiritual aspect that seems to be more prevalent than we have in the Western world. So I'm just curious, and you have been a truth seeker for a very long time. So what is a meaningful life in your culture?
My culture? You're asking from me?
And for you, yes.
In my culture, and by my thinking also, life means to support the others by your knowledge, by your wisdom. But I'm doing this. For me, success and the failures has no meanings. Only the satisfaction of my heart. But the poor are not getting, the tribals are not getting any help. I am providing them, going by my own expenses and giving them healing. So what satisfaction I am getting, it's a far ahead from the success or the failures. Doesn't it gives you a little bit more money? For that, you will live like a luxurious life, but you won't get the satisfaction. What I feel, I won't get any. So my passion, can say, or my hobby, both have to say, I'm going to the interiors where the peoples are neglected by the society, by the government, by the others. I'm giving their healings and staying with them in their small huts, in the forest. That's a different world. For me, the life is this.
Okay, so it's about making a difference to other people.
Yeah.
So we don't really, that's not really, I mean, do we have that explicitly for a meaningful life? Because when we go into obituaries, there's always, they were selfless, they were there for other people, they were contributing, but that's not how we measure meaning as such. I mean, I remember my father saying to me at some point, when are you ever going to be successful? And I said, how do you measure success? And he said, by the things I've got around me. And I said, well, see, that's for me, that's not success.
That's not the success. That's not the success.
No.
But my thinking, the success is how much you are satisfied your inner, and how much happy you feel. In this period so many of my friends, my college friends, they are now multimillionaires. But their family is facing so much crisis. Their sons are involved in drug addictions, and their kids are not good. But thanks to God, my kids are well settled. My daughter is doing her PhD in mathematics. So it's only, now I can say that I'm a successful. Doesn't matter, I'm successful. A house is not a big house. I even didn't purchase this property. It's inherited my father's property, and I am passing my life here.
Okay. So can you be successful and have meaning, Chris? Can you be not successful and have meaning? I'm completely generalizing here, but again, a lot of people use success and meaning interchangeably.
Yeah.
I come from the point of view that we're always creating meaning in some way. The way that I've structured my way of thinking about this is about becoming, and it's who do we want to become, and how can we play a role in that creation for ourselves. So as a simple premise, I sort of start off with talking to people about the foundations of who they want to become. So for me, I have a very simple set of foundations, and it's an acronym that sort of ends up as the word drift. And it speaks to 5 things: difference, respect, inquiry, fulfillment, and trust. And it covers a broad range. So it's more than just what I create in the world or what I own. It speaks to the relationships that I have. It speaks to how I want to experience life in some ways. It also speaks to how I want to expand who I am in some ways. And the principles for me are that when I find myself in a difficult, well, in any circumstance, difficult or otherwise, I can always go back to those ideas, and I can ask myself, what's the difference I want to make here? I can ask myself, how can I do this respectfully for myself and for other people? I can ask myself, how will I feel fulfilled in this circumstance? How will I build trust or mitigate trust if I can't actually build it, if there's going to be a couple of poor choices to be made? And how can I inquire? What do I need to inquire about, or what can I learn about in some ways? And the principles for me is that by asking those questions, I enrich my sense of life. I enrich the meaning of my life, because for me, life is situational. We go through different situations. When I was 20 years old, I had a very different sense of life than where I am now in my 60s. And it's sort of, as I've gone through life, I have found myself thinking about, okay, well, what does life mean for me now? But I didn't have a practice around it or anything like that in days gone by. And so what I do when I do that is I feel a sense of groundedness that comes with that, because I'm connecting how I'm thinking about a situation I find myself in to who I want to become, the bigger meaning of my life, about how I want to live my life and how I want to be in life. So in some ways, it fits back to what KB was saying there about what success looks like in terms of fulfillment or happiness, or however one wants to think about it. And so when I work with the people I work with these days, I invite them to work out those foundations for themselves and to start to explore those questions for themselves on an ongoing basis. And the principles are straightforward for me anyway, in that what it means is that you create an alignment into how you want to be in life, and constantly enrich that story of how I want to be in life. And so rather than having an answer, as Kathy was alluding to before, there's a whole lot of little answers that actually build up into an enriched story of life for me. which is about how I make sense and how I create meaning in my life. And I like to share that then with the people I work with these days.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny when my father asked me, he said, then how do you define success? And I answered, I said, I'm growing. I'm happy within myself, and I've got wonderful relationships in my life. And he just went, oh my God, when are you ever going to grow up? And I was 22 at that point. And I said, you know what? We just have to agree to disagree, because for me, it's a different way of living. Yeah. For me, it's, financial success or, the things that I have around me, they don't make meaning.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I don't like money, but it's not, it's an effect of my meaning, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I like to think of it as success is about connection for me. It's about connection to myself and my whole inner world, and connection. And as you mentioned, Angela, the relationships in your life, connection to others. I think you touched on that too, Chris, and you too, KB, with making a difference. Because at the end of the day, I always remember that interview when they interviewed people just before they died. And they asked them, what do you remember about your life? And it was universal with what they all said, which was what was important was the people that they loved and who loved them, because it was just so simple. And I totally relate to that, because at the end of the day, there's all these things, all these distractions and all these other wonderful things. Sometimes they're not distractions, but they can be enhancements too. But yeah, the connections, that's just, how do you put a value on that? And I think since COVID, I think a lot of people realize that. I think the positive thing that came out of COVID was people questioning their lives. People were forced to take stock of their lives. They were suddenly then in their households locked up with their family members or what have you. And they realized, wow, what's my life all about? For many people, it was all about work, and making money, right? Climbing the corporate ladder and things. And suddenly people realize, wow, I'm really missing connection. And I still think that's going on to a certain point. It'd be interesting to hear what everyone else thinks. But so anyway, for me, I think success is all about connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, so we're all in agreement that it's not about money, that success is not the same as meaning necessarily. So are we at the end of the discussion already?
Can I add something into this conversation?
Please.
One of the things that I find intriguing about the world today is the way we think about connection. Like social media and people on Facebook or other sorts of things feel connected in some ways. We have, in fact, I think I saw an article just recently that said that text-based communication has now outstripped voicemail or voice conversations on technology, and that people prefer these days to actually just have a text-based conversation through WhatsApp or SMS or Messenger or whatever. And one of the things I found really intriguing about that was that, for me, that actually takes away a lot of the personal connection when we're doing it. Even though we think we're connected to a degree, in many ways we're not. We are just connected to our phones or our computers or whatever, and have this sense that we're actually engaged in a conversation, but it is a very bland, black and white, colourless type conversation that we have, compared to the richness of a conversation such as this, for example, where you can actually see people, but even more so when you're in the presence of people as well. And there's something about that sharing of hearing another person's voice and watching how they move, and hearing the emotional states that they are coming in and out of, that creates a lot more connection for me personally than just a text message. Text messages are great. I mean, Angela sent me a text message asking me to do something just before we came on today. And that's fine, because it's a simple thing. It's just a request, and it's a yes/no thing. There's no necessary embellishment required. But for many other things, the meaning is found in our listening. I think that one of the things that people miss is that meaning is found in context, and we all have. I mean, every one of us has a very different context of our lives, and so we each make sense, and we're sort of sitting down, the four of us, in many ways, trying to work out what the other people are talking about, where they're coming from. What do they mean when they say that? How does that then sit with how it means to me? So this sense of meaning for me is just a constant thing that we are doing to try and work out other people. So then bringing it back to connection, in many ways for me, connection is about trying to create shared meaning with other people, and shared meaning that we take forward in relationship in some way. And so I sort of wholeheartedly agree with that idea of feeling loved and loving, etc., as being very, very much a big part of the meaning we have in life.
Can I ask a question? Do you think that the search for meaning is actually a bit of a construct?
I find the idea of the search for meaning ridiculous.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because by definition, that means meaning is somewhere else.
Mm.
For me, we create meaning all the time.
Human beings,
we are in a process of creation.
Machines. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
We're just wired to make meaning out of things which often don't even exist, right?
We do. One of the great coaching techniques, Angela, isn't it, is to be silent and let other people listen to your silence and see what they do, right? And they're making meaning out of the silence. So absolutely, I think that's really valid. So the idea for me is that we create our own meaning. How do we do that in a way that helps us live the life we want to live? And for me, most people are coming from a different point of view. They're on self-discovery journeys, etc. Again, the definition is there's a self to be discovered. They're looking for meaning in the world. I don't know if you watched The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by any chance at some point in time, but the age-old answer of 42 is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. I mean, that was really ironic, because that was an answer, but it wasn't an answer people wanted. So I think that idea that we are constantly making meaning, how do we do that in a way that works better for us, I think is such an important question. And I don't think it's a question that's really addressed by many people, and certainly not through our education systems or formal learning systems in any significant way.
Do you think also that the need to look for meaning is often because there's an absence, that, you know, there's an absence of maybe lack of understanding of oneself? I mean, I can only relate it to my own situation. When I look at why I was always searching for meaning, it was because I didn't understand myself. And so there was a lack of, you know, self-esteem, a lack of self-love. And so that's the journey I had to go on to find meaning for myself. But it was kind of like this, finding the meaning was disguising these areas of my life that I didn't want to look at, because they were scary, you know?
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear what others think about that, you know?
Well, if I may give this to KB, because you went and you worked and lived in with gurus, and you know, you really went looking for truth and meaning, right? So what was your motivation?
It was the same what I have told you. My motivation was to help the society by my knowledge and to make the awareness about the spirituality, about the meditations. That's what I'm doing.
Because I see, for me, it was for a long time, my meaning was also to help people. I mean, I started doing self-development at a very young age. I mean, I finished the self-development section of the city library at the age of 15, and when there's got to be more. And the reason I wanted that was because my family was fairly dysfunctional. There was not a lot of great communication or anything like that. And I didn't want to pass on those kind of patterns to the next generation. I didn't want to raise children like you, Kathy, you said, with low self-esteem, not being able to think for themselves, but follow all the, this is how we do it. The rules that had been set up ages ago that didn't make any sense. But I really didn't start working with people until I felt that I could handle myself. And that took a long time. Many, many, many years of understanding again. And it wasn't necessarily being, it was becoming. But I had a foundation. I didn't want to sit in front of somebody, and I've had that. I have worked with people who said, oh, you've got that, I've got that. And I wanted to be somebody who could at least ask some interesting questions, or some questions that would lead the person forward from a place of stability, and not, oh my God, this is something I need to know too. And so now I'm finally at an age, I think, where I feel like I can contribute. Just starting to. And I'm still becoming.
I know where it started for me. Like I can clearly remember when my son was born. Ryan is now 30 years old, and we went along to prenatal classes. And I can always remember being asked to picture one thing about your mother and one thing about your father. And I always remember thinking about my mum, who just died of cancer, in the kitchen with a cigarette in her mouth, but by herself. And I always remember my dad in the garden, but I pictured both of them by themselves and me disconnected from them. And I can clearly remember at that time thinking, I don't want to be that parent to my child. But then finding myself in the question of, well, who do I want to be? What sort of parent do I want to be? Which then led me into what sort of human being do I want to be? And that sort of, in many ways, was the start of my journey. But there was that breakdown of the way I thought about myself that created the questions that I then started to explore, that I was fortunate enough to meet some people who were able to help me on that journey. And I think that's one of the things in life about creating meaning, a big meaning in life, is we come back to connection, relationship, but it's who we find ourselves in relationship with, who are the people that help us live in those questions and find answers to those questions, but also continue to ask questions that allow us to expand even further into our understanding of who we want to be, and actually more the creation of who we want to be. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to understand themselves without necessarily trying to create themselves. And so it's one thing to understand yourself, but for me, it's another thing to go, how can I be who I want to be? Rather than understanding who I am, how can I be who I want to be? For me, is a more powerful question and a more powerful approach.
It's interesting, because it's the self-development. It used to be the, like, again, I did recovery work for quite a long time as well, because there was always the sense of something had to be fixed. I was broken, or I was quite, and I came to a place where I went, no, I'm done with that. I am who I am. And it's about, again, as Chris was just saying, who do I want to be? What kind of, what do I want to grow into? So instead of, and it's interesting because I studied history initially, because I thought if I could learn from the past, I could create a different future. And now I go, maybe not. Because if we keep looking backwards, you know, and it's the only reference points we've got, we are bound to recreate what we had then.
Repeating itself, yeah.
And then meaning is exactly what we talked about. It becomes that, you know, like not necessarily empty, but it's a more shallow kind of, I don't know. I don't want to sound judgmental, because everything, you know, we need to earn money. We need to do all of these success, you know, like having things, and they are also matter. But for me, they don't make a meaningful life. Something like you would say, it's not something that I would look back at and go, "Ooh, I'm so glad I've got that much money in my account." I would look back and say, these are the relationships I've had. These are the conversations I've had. Like these are the conversations I take with me, and they keep me thinking and feeling for days. And every conversation, that every panel discussion I have, that's what matters to me.
I agree. Yeah, it's the depth and richness of those conversations, isn't it, that leads to you know, much stronger, deeper connections.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's a lot of, again, I suppose that does sound judgmental, like you said, Angela, but there are a lot of people that don't know how to have those conversations, right? And so their lives maybe are more superficial, like they never reach a stage of really connecting deeply with somebody, because in order to connect deeply with somebody, you need to be able to have those sorts of conversations. And obviously those conversations have to come from the listening, as you've mentioned, Chris, that, you know, if you're having conversation with a person that's not able to, then it's a one-way, you know, means of communication. So that's not very enriching or, you know, satisfying. So, yeah, so I think what you're saying there about the conversations, which are all connected to the connections, right? That sounded funny, but I mean, yeah, it's that the depth of those conversations is where the meaning comes into it, the bigger meaning that you're referring to, Chris.
I think, I mean, like we've always said in our work, that you can tell the quality of a relationship by the quality of the conversations had. And the irony is that you can only change the relationship by changing the conversation. And I think that's sort of the challenge for many people, is they don't know how to change the conversation. It's so habitual. The relationship dynamics that people have is so habitual that they find themselves in just habitual conversations with another person that are responded to habitually in some ways. And people then find themselves in a stasis in their conversations rather than a deepening of relationship, etc. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're now living in a world where there's so much information out there. I mean, you talked about the social media side, and yet we find ourselves in a world where, you know, there is so much less communication in many ways, in terms of the communication we're talking about, really in-depth conversations. There's so much more superficiality around in the world, and yet we have so many more tools, so much more knowledge for it to be quite the opposite.
What's your experience, KB? Has life become more superficial?
Different things. It's near to spirituality for my thing. It's not solution. It is just a reality. If you live every moment, every second in the present, you feel the life is just different, and you are connected with the supernatural powers. If you focus completely focus in your day-to-day life, what I felt. That's called the awareness. If you are aware that you are near to the God, you are near to the spirituality, there will be no need for meditations. There will be no, every our steps gives us the signals for the coming. That awareness, if you get, and only way is to focus on your consciously focus, just like an observer, to your every action. Like when we are talking, I'm focusing on that I am just an observer. I'm talking. And when I'm listening, I'm observing this. Every person, everything gives you signals. By that you can say the God or divine forces are talking to you. I think only your subconscious, when you're speaking and your words are coming from your stomach and touching your every part of your body. That reflects, that visualize your personality and your life. That focus counts everything. This is what I found in my 40 years of experience. When my client speaks, I tell him what type of problem he is having by only his words, listening his words, because the words are coming from the inner side and they are having the complete knowledge of our body. For me, life is a different thing. Every day is your experiment. When it comes to the end, then you feel, oh, this was the wrong and that was the. But if you would do in your life that you will not feel that you have done this wrong and right. That's a different. We are rushing for the money, we are rushing for the cars, and we are rushing for the property. We will not take it there in our next journey. It will remain here.
So what I'm hearing is that we need to be present, but we also need to contemplate. We need to think about what it is that we're doing. So we need to be aware of what's going on. But it's really interesting. It's like a lot of people, I'm just creating an app on listening skills. And one of the first things I say in the introduction is, this is not about asking questions. This is not about clarifying. This is just about learning how to be present with somebody, because we don't know how to do that anymore. A lot of people don't listen to listen. They listen in order to reply. And the one thing I looked into is we don't know how to manage our attention anymore. So we're losing the meaning, as Chris was saying, of words, of actions, and then it's just transactional in emails. we just don't have that kind of meaning anymore by being present with somebody and really being there for them. And we don't know how to, I mean, we used to have, I mean, they say that we had about 12 seconds of undivided attention. That was our attention span until the smartphone kicked in, and then it went down to 9 seconds. But people are constantly shifting back and forth between things. And I just researched today attention management tools. There are apps and websites that help you block things so you can stay focused on something. So, and I actually asked the question, what is it that's stopping you from having a real conversation? There are only 3 reasons for me. Lives need to be saved, buildings are burning, women are in labor. Everything else can stop and wait until I'm finished with a conversation I'm having with somebody, or what is it that I'm doing. But we don't do that anymore. There's this, as you said, rush, rush, rush. And we don't make meaning in a slow way anymore. It's all fast. It's like I'm going to do the, like, you know, let's say you develop a course, you know, master your life in 3 days. You'll get people sign up for that. You say to people, I'm going to teach you some tools and it's going to take you 3 years. Nobody will.
Very true.
It's not a 2 minutes noodle, instant.
A 2-minute noodle.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You have to slowly. That's what I'm teaching. How to focus. When everything will speak to you. You know, in Sikhism, there is a story that Guru Nanak was going with his students, scholars, and he said, from the distance, from this house is having the income source in a wrong with the blood. And this house is very positive. They are having the income source for the hardworking. Wonder how it is nothing. Vibrations. At that time, people were not knowing the vibrations. And you won't believe it, but it is the bacteria which are not visible, but they are having their own language, their own culture, own traditions. They are in your home, in my home, everywhere. Whatever we talk, whatever we behave, whatever what type of we live, it counts. And they moves in your surrounding areas. Knowing that language is an art. He was knowing that language, and he told that this house is having income from the bloodshed, and this house is having income from hardworking. My whole healings is based on this. Our body is having so many bacteria from top to bottom. There are several, and you know, the medical science also says the microbes are there in our body. Those microbes are having a different culture. Some are making the blood Some are connecting with the bones, some are in the brain, but they are not having, they don't know the language of others. Their language is different, their culture is different, everything is different. I told you just now when my clients rang me up and he says, hello, I tell him he is suffering from this and this problems from this and this years. And just, it is nothing. It's only the practice, but slowly. The language, first we have to focus on us. What we are not doing. Everybody wants the quickest results. So for me, it's different.
So, yeah, okay. So, what do we agree on?
Sorry?
What do we agree on?
What to be?
Agree on. Because I think we agree on a lot.
I think we're
Yes,
agreeing on
yes.
most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We agree on life. This is a very complicated subject. But he can give the answer what the life is.
yeah. But what I'm saying is it's a big question, right? And yet
Yes.
we brought it down to all the really simple things. Get to know yourself, make connections with others.
Life is different.
It seems like a big question, but really it's not.
This is a different. And for me, it's a different. Life has so many phases.
I think what shows up to me is that there's just not one answer. There's answers for each of us.
Yeah.
In some ways, and what relationships or connection means for Kathy, for example, and for me, could well be different.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately that's what this is about, is that each one of us makes meaning for ourselves, and we often think that we share it with other people, but we only think that. We don't actually know that we do, but we act as though we do, which is useful for us to be part of communities and groups, etc. So I think ultimately, the way I've listened to the conversation, meaning lives in our communities, in our relationships, in many ways.
It's the shared meaning. I was actually about to say, you know, when we talk about connection, we agree on connection, but what that means to us individually, that's a totally different story. If I say, what does connection mean to you? How do you create connection? That would be totally different from how Kathy might see it. But when we create shared meaning, then we might overlap on some level. Maybe not that much, maybe just a little bit. But, you know, there's some sort of creating a shared reality that we then agree to, and then we have meaning.
Yeah, what I've been hearing with what everyone's been saying is, as you said, Chris, you know, we all come to it with different interpretations or associations of the meaning, but I still can't help but think at the core of all of it is, as you said, Angela, shared meaning. How can we have meaning in our life when it's not shared? It's not something that lives just for ourselves, even though it may seem it is. So I'm getting this picture that meaning can't be meaning without it being shared, as you mentioned, the shared meaning, Angela. Yet so much of our lives, and I think still what the general perception of meaning is, it's a very individual thing. Yes, but no is what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
Well, I think what we can agree to, as Chris was saying, we all have different definitions and everybody makes different meaning.
Having said that, though, Angela, we all grow up in big narratives of our communities. You know, that I grew up in a certain set of narratives which become or the context for how I make meaning. We've all done that. We've all grown up in different ways. You know, KB's grown up in a very different experience to my life, and you guys have grown up in very different experiences to my life as well. So the idea that we can create this sense of shared meaning, I think, is so important, given that we all come from such different backgrounds, and yet,
which is
yeah, I mean, you're fundamentally trying to create this sense of what have we shared. So,
but isn't that the human condition, Chris? Isn't that the human condition?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, in many ways, we are social beings. So, yeah. I mean, we're meaning-making beings as well, but we're social beings as well.
And humanity, doesn't humanity exist in, you know, in that connection, right? That humanity is, you know, we talked a lot about, I think we all agree about whatever that word connection means to you, but maybe we just use the word relationships. Maybe that's another substitute word, right? So I've lost my point now, sorry. I've lost my point.
I'm sure it was brilliant, whatever it was.
Sorry, come back to me. There was a point to what I was going to make. I'll come back
to Well, the one thing I'm getting from, I mean, what I'd like to know is if we could just wrap up and says, like, what did you get from this conversation? Because we're about to wrap up. What's the one thing that you know, maybe you had an aha moment, or maybe something you realized, or something where you went, yeah, I knew that, but that made it really clear.
my aha, sorry.
After you, Kathy, please.
Sorry, my aha moment would be when you said shared meaning. That was something that I think that I had realized, but I couldn't articulate it. So, you know, and as I've just said a moment ago, for me, meaning does not exist without being shared. So that was my aha moment. I thought, I kept, you know, for most of my life, I kept thinking the search for meaning was very individual. And I'm not saying it still isn't, but I'm saying there's like a piece missing. If you go on this search for meaning and it's just completely individual and it's not shared, I don't think that is the meaning of life, because to me, it's skipping out the whole humanity bit. That's my aha moment.
Okay. KB, what is your takeaway from today's conversation?
Life is to help others. That's why. Not for personal. Life, more you give, what you have, knowledge, wisdom, and serve for the sufferers. Life is not to live for your own. Life is to live for others. Mine.
Chris.
I think I have been struck by the uniqueness of human beings. One of the things that is fundamental to my work is that we're all unique observers of the world. And yet we find ourselves in relationship with other people, relating to other people in a sense of what we share. And I think that sort of is such an important component to it that although I take Kathy's point for me that we have shared meaning, but we create our own meaning in the context of that shared meaning. and that we're always creating this sense of meaning for ourselves as we go through life. But it's important for each of us, in order to relate to others, we have to create this sense of sharedness as well. I mean, that for me is fundamental.
Mm. Mm. For me, it was
What's
the.
your opinion?
Hmm?
What's your opinion?
Oh, I was just about to say, for me, the aha moment was when, I think it was Chris who said and everybody said that we create meaning from moment to moment. It's not a life goal. So by the time I die, I will have created meaning, or I will have known what my purpose is, what the meaning of life was, 42. But I make meaning every single moment, and I share it with others, and I make it for myself. So it's a process. It's not an answer, as Chris was saying. It's a question every day, every moment. It's about being present to that awareness, to that contemplation. What is meaningful to me right now, to myself, to relate in relationships? So that would be.
Might I offer that this conversation has been an enrichment process for each of us in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's added to the meaning of our lives in some way.
Yeah.
Definitely. No, it's definitely made me think of a few other things too. And I'm sure I'm still processing.
Yeah. And if it's anything that I go through, I mean, every time I have these panel discussions, it nourishes my soul for days afterwards, because it just throws up so many things that I can, that I can then use to think about and feel into, and, and again, grow and be present to. So. Any final words?
No, I just want to say thanks, Angela, for inviting me, and it was great to meet you two gentlemen, and to have this conversation, because it's a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for the topic, Chris. Sorry.
Oh,
Yes.
you're welcome, and it's been a delight to meet you two as well.
Well, thank you, everybody. I mean, I mean, Chris suggested the topic, and I thought, who would be interesting in talking about this? And I thought to other people, we come from so different places, different backgrounds, different life paths. And funnily enough, there are so many there. Again, we've got connection, right? And that's what I find so fascinating. And that's what I love about these conversations. So thank you, all of you, for contributing and enriching the world and making more meaning.
Pleasure, Angela.
Thanks,
Thank
Angela.
you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching and for listening. And until the next panel session.